Sports Talk Chicago. Here for Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the host of Mully and Haugh on 670 The Score, host of the Take the North podcast, and a contributor to NBC Sports Chicago. Please welcome David Haugh to the program. David, great to have you on. How are you?
I'm doing well, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being here. Always fun to have you on and talk some Bears football. What do you make of that Bears-Seahawks game from last week?
Well, I don't know that you ever want to read too much into one game, especially when the starters played as little as they did. I thought it was encouraging from a couple different standpoints. I thought that Tevin Jenkins at right guard made an impression. I thought Cole Kmet, it was nice to see him on the field. There was only one play that really stood out from Justin Fields' perspective, but I like the way they're attempting to move the pocket. And there were some signs defensively of young players, guys who might be back into the roster, guys who might even be practice squad guys. But players like Jack Sanborn, for instance, the linebacker who has flashed in 2 games. And you talk about rookies and Velus Jones getting an opportunity to show why the Bears are excited about him, not only as a special teamer, but perhaps using that kind of speed and explosiveness in the passing game. So you are a first-year head coach with a first-year staff. You're trying to establish a culture, and I think the Seattle trip was a good it was a worthwhile work trip for the Bears.
How do you like the defense's energy? I thought a lot of guys were attacking the football pretty quickly. They look much different compared to Seattle's defensive front.
The way that I've described it this preseason is that you want to see evidence of coaching, and I think we are seeing that with the way the Bears run to the football. And we're seeing the actions back up the corny words, right? The words that make the HITS acronym what it is. I think you're seeing those kinds of things practiced in real time, and you're seeing the tangible results of that. It just isn't a slogan anymore. You're seeing, players actually run to the football and try to tackle the football, and realize takeaways are a big part of this regime. And it reminds me of 2004 and when Lovie Smith first came here. That doesn't mean it's going to go that way. So many other things were different in terms of just the personnel on the roster, but in terms of the emphasis, it does take me back a long time ago. It tells you how long I have been covering this team, but first year of Lovie Smith's regime was very similar in tone, emphasis, and style to Matt Eberflus's.
Now, that was a tough year for the Bears, too. So are you saying it's going to be another tough season for the Bears come this year?
I think I'm saying that it's hard to measure success in the first year of a regime when the emphasis is as much on, the way you play, and it's more on the style than the substance, perhaps. And it's going to be everything in the NFL is measured by wins and losses. And I think maybe the Bears only won 5 games that first season, but there was a sense something was going on and the arrow was pointing up. And similarly, I think that you could have a season end in Chicago with double-digit losses even. Now that you play 17 games, I wouldn't be so surprised if there are double-digit losses, but you end the season encouraged because of some of the things that you have seen from the defense, maybe from the offensive style and play calling, and hopefully from the quarterback. So I think that is the way that I think this season should be evaluated, because that is the smartest way for the ownership to do so and to get out of this rut of firing people once they get tired of them.
How would you quantify success, or at least moving in the right direction for the Bears?
I do think it's going to be hard to quantify. I don't think that you want to do that. Look, and I understand in every NFL market, it's difficult to get to the point where you're talking abstractly about what you see. But I think that if you watch enough football and if you understand what you're seeing, you kind of know progress when you see it, and you'll know it. I don't think there was any time. Again, we're forced to kind of compare regimes here, but because there have been so many, I don't think there was any time in Mark Trestman's era after the first few games that you sensed the Bears were onto something here. You saw a really nice offensive mix early on and some results. But once you got into game management and leadership and some of the intangibles, it didn't feel right. John Fox never really felt like a guy that was going to win in Chicago, just because it didn't seem like he wanted to be here that much for any other reason to maybe just finish out his career and get paid handsomely. And I think Matt Nagy, after the first year, you felt like things were going well. And I think he lost his way because it wasn't sustainable. He kept on trying to add on, rather than try to maybe play to the strengths of the players on his roster. And that's a long answer, John, to the question. But I think that after the first year of Matt Eberflus, trying to quantify things would be a mistake, because we've been through that with Matt Nagy. You quantified the first year as a rousing success. They won 12 games and it was all this and all that. And yet you started to see in year two why that was the wrong way to measure success. So I think from a football perspective, keep the emphasis on the things that are boring but important, the fundamental progress and strides that they will make. And I think that already we've begun to see those evidence of that kind of evidence of coaching.
David Haugh here on Sports Talk Chicago. David, how's Justin Fields looking to you right now?
Well, it's been so limited in terms of the exposure. There's some things that I like and some things that are, unfortunately familiar. I think what you like is that there seems to be a tendency to, or there's going to be a tendency for the Bears to open things up and let him maybe use his skill set more freely than maybe the previous regime did. I like the way they're moving the pocket. I think they're trying to take advantage of his athleticism. I think he's got to improve his accuracy, but you can do that. You can help him do that by limiting the scope of the kinds of plays and passes you call. I think there's still maybe a habit that he has of giving up on a route or not anticipating one in that split second that you really like to see the great quarterbacks anticipate. Throw the ball before a guy's open, throw the ball before a guy breaks, and don't be afraid to stand there an extra millisecond or half second before you tuck it and run it and try to make something happen. These are things that are going to come with experience. And I know that sounds like a cop-out. I'm certainly not a Justin Fields apologist. I think that he still has greatness in him. I don't know if I feel better about him after this preseason than I did at the end of last season, just because I think we haven't seen that much. He still makes some mistakes in practice that are product of inexperience. He's going to, not be the polished passer necessarily all the time, but he does throw the deep ball well, and he's better, I think, on the move than he is stationary. And so once he gets that comfort level, once he has a pocket that might not be collapsing around him all the time, I think you'll start to see improvement.
Are we going to know by the end of this season whether or not he's the guy?
Ideally, yeah, but I'm not so sure that is going to be as exclusive as people want it to be, and maybe as the Bears need it to be. I think the one thing that that's an interesting question, because it will be the source of a lot of conversation around Chicago, and I think I get why, because we're on such a rush to draw conclusions and move on and start to think about things and when's he going to get paid? That'll be the next. When's he going to have the next contract? I think the Bears would be making a mistake if they are demanding to know that answer and they think that there's a deadline. I know deadlines are important when you're talking about contract negotiations and things of that nature. I don't know if it's that important when it comes to evaluating your franchise quarterback. You'd like to know, but if you don't, you want to trust your evaluation process and see why don't you know more than you do? What factors contributed to that? So I don't want to sit here in late August and say, yeah, the Bears have to know at the end of the season if they have franchise quarterback, because I don't know what role injuries are going to play. I don't know what role inconsistency along the offensive line is going to play. I don't know how much to hold the team and the front office responsible for not giving him receivers that would help that growth. So I'm not a black and white guy. I tried to see a lot of gray, and I think there's a lot of gray area here. So what I'm telling you is that by the end of the season, ideally you want to have an answer on Justin Fields. But if you don't, I don't think that means that he's a bust. I just think it means that there might not be other factors that are there, and he might not have all of the resources that he needs to have the full answer.
Do you think there'd be an adjustment period too, knowing this is going to be another offense for him, new offense, two offenses in 2 years?
Yeah, that's anymore. That's the thing that's part of being an NFL quarterback. That's not ideal either, John. You're right. And I think that's the other thing you have to consider. If his relationship and rapport and connection with Luke Getsy or Andrew Janocko or even Matt Eberflus to a lesser degree, but if his relationship with the coaching staff and his comfort level with his teammates is such that you can see the ways that he would continue to progress when given more weapons, and you're going to spend in free agency to get a number one wide receiver, or you're going to spend in free agency to get a game breaking, slot guy, whatever the case may be, then I think you're going to be more willing to make those sort of mental concessions you need to make. And his comfort level is going to be very important, and his maturation, I think, that you're already beginning to see, will also weigh into.
Who's his most valuable asset on offense right now, if anybody?
Well, I think the obvious answer is Darnell Mooney because of the chemistry, but I would suggest that the two other guys that are every bit as important are Cole Kmet, who could be his best friend on third downs, as well as a guy that you know that can help block. This is a big year for Cole Kmet as anybody in that offense. So I think Cole Kmet is a guy that can block on running plays and be a weapon on passing downs and be an asset for your quarterback who needs to know that he can throw the ball where Cole Kmet and the tight end needs to be, and he'll catch it. David Montgomery is another guy. David Montgomery has been very quiet this preseason, and he hasn't complained about not having a contract beyond this year, and he hasn't complained about his role in this offense or what it's going to be. All David Montgomery has done is that he has shown up ready to work, committed to being great and staying healthy. And if he does stay healthy, he will be great. I really think that he has that kind of skill set where if he's healthy and they can feed him the ball, get him 15 to 20 touches a game, you'll see numbers that reflect one of the 5 or 10 best running backs in the NFL.
So is he worth giving a contract extension to?
Not right now, John. I think that we are in such a rush to get these deals struck and these commitments made. And I understand why Roquan Smith did what he did. I'm glad David Montgomery didn't, because the running back position is, as well as linebacker, I guess it's the linebacker equivalent. It is replaceable. You are not one of those value positions. You don't play that. And so it would be foolhardy to try to take a stand on something. It'd be like protesting something that, isn't all that important to the day-to-day life of somebody. And I think the running back is important in this offense. Can be a bigger part of it if you're really special. But I think that David Montgomery has to just show this year why he is special. So right now is not the time to make those demands. The time to really evaluate your future, and maybe the Bears would find it in their best interest to pay him, will be either after a good start or possibly, before the end of the season, near the end when a lot of extensions are struck, or perhaps even after the season. But John, that you look around the league and running backs are replaceable, and you have to just consider that the Bears, have so many other needs that might come at the expense of not being able to pay David Montgomery. Wait and see.
What was your take on the Roquan Smith situation?
Well, I thought it started out very clumsy for the Bears, and I thought that it got even clumsier from Roquan Smith's vantage point. So both sides did probably represent themselves in the greatest way early. Roquan Smith made the trade demand, and then that was a shrewd move, the way that it was structured, the way it caught the Bears off guard. But then I think once he got things got away from him, not representing himself and having the third party uncertified, agent contacting teams was a bad move and reflected poorly on him. And then Ryan Poles held his ground. We'll wait and see whether that was smart or not. But I would think that early on, holding your ground made a good statement for Ryan Poles, and he did represent himself pretty well, in my view, because he didn't acquiesce and he didn't let the best talent on his roster walk out the door, or he didn't trade Roquan Smith, which I thought would have been a mistake to overreact. It would have been a mistake to fine him. That would have been an overreaction. So I guess I would be one, and have done so on the radio on the Mully and Haugh show. I have praised Ryan Poles for not overreacting. It might be a low bar, but we've seen general managers, especially first-time guys, overreact in contract negotiations. He didn't. And so he has Roquan Smith he's not happy. Football players being happy is kind of overrated, to be honest with you. You want guys, especially linebackers, coming to work and getting to the ball in a bad mood. You really do, because football is a violent game. You got to play it with a degree of intensity and urgency. And I think that when you heard Roquan Smith saying and wondering why, he didn't have a new contract, it seems as if he's betting on himself, he wants to make a strong impression. So if you have a motivated Roquan Smith and you're already the most talented defender on your roster, then that bodes well for that defense. So I think Ryan Poles played this pretty well in the end. And Roquan Smith, okay, there were some clumsy missteps along the way. Nobody's any worse for the wear. The worst case scenario for him is that he gets to the end of the season. They want to keep him around and they have to use a franchise tag and he doubles his salary. That's not a bad situation to be in.
So is Roquan Smith even worth $20 million, though? I mean, it was his contract demand fair?
Well, I think, John, if we're going to take it at $20 million, if that's we don't really know. We're not privy to the specifics of the contract offer. But I think that, again, everything is, if you tell somebody who is living in a mansion that, and they have a lot of disposable income and they have a pool in the backyard and 3 cars in the garage and they don't have to worry about how they're going to pay for next month's groceries or pay their bills, what can you afford? Well, then what would you pay for, another car or a nicer vehicle? I think it's all relative. And so with the Bears, what do they have? What can they afford? What do they need? And I know that sometimes that will get you in trouble, and you don't want to always take that kind of lackadaisical approach or maybe loose approach to your budgetary items and needs. But the Bears next year will have over $100 million in salary cap space. The Bears now have the 5th most space salary cap wise of teams in the league. And they need to go through this season controversy free. And so what I suggested on the air, and I think that if they would have signed him to that contract, was he worth $20 million a year in the marketplace? Is he the best off the ball linebacker? Probably not. But I do think that, if they are going to pick any player to overpay on the roster, it would be okay with me if they picked him, because I know it's not a value position, but you do need to have somebody to build your defense around. He's 25 years old. He's a Pro Bowl caliber player. I am not, saying he automatically deserves $20 million, but I think that I have seen them write worse contracts if they did that. I have seen them squander more millions in certain cases. And I would have been understanding of why they chose to pay him that amount per year if they did choose to pay him that amount per year.
When do you think they're going to be good again?
I would hope that they could, as early as next year, be good again. Being good again in the NFL is being a playoff contender. And if you are good enough to contend for a playoff spot, then I think that the second year of a new regime, 2005 it was for Lovie Smith. They stunk in 2004. If we want to continue to make those parallels and draw those comparisons, then I think that realistically, we don't know what the offseason is going to bring, but I just referenced the salary cap space. We get the sense that Ryan Poles, as clumsy as some of the things that he has done in the first 6 months in terms of free agency and player acquisitions and that kind of thing, he does appear to be a fairly shrewd evaluator of talent. And sometimes that can prevail over some of the other things. If this draft class of 2022 turns out to be one that you look at and you identify as many as 4 starters in this group, maybe 5, then you're talking. Then you're thinking, wow, this could be something that the next draft, you find a couple more guys, free agency, you add a couple more guys. And then the wild card, frankly, is the quarterback. If Justin Fields is special, and that's obvious by the end of this season, then you could envision a 2023 in which the Bears enter training camp at Halas Hall next July and think, okay, this is a year we begin to be competitive again. This is the year we can contend for the playoff.
David Haugh still here on Sports Talk Chicago. David, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, take the North. How'd it come up?
Take the North is a podcast for Odyssey that Dan Weeder and I are doing. Dan and I work together at the Tribune, as you know, and remain good friends. He's terrific. They wanted to do a Bears-centric podcast a couple times a week, take advantage of the Bears audience and also to take advantage of our experience. Dan's been on the beat for 10 years. This will be my 20th season covering the Bears in some capacity since I came to the Tribune back in the Dick Duran era. So we are just trying to tap into that experience. We both have opinions. It's not the place to go, frankly, if you want to, put on your bear goggles, if you will, and to see things through the prism of rose-colored glasses. By the same token, it's not the place to go if you just want, constant negativity. Hopefully, Dan and I are going to be in a position where we're fair and we're critical when it's necessary and we're positive when it warrants. So it's a lot of fun so far. We've got 3 or 4 episodes already going, and you can get it on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, as you know, John. But Odyssey is embarking on the podcast direction and going in the podcast game, and we're happy to be a part of that with Take the North.
I wouldn't blame you guys if you were pretty negative. I mean, 30 years combined on this beat covering the Bears. I mean, that must be tough. I'm serious. That must be really tough to have to deal with all this losing and mediocrity over time.
John, as you continue in this business and you do a terrific job, you will realize that when you are watching sports for a living and you're evaluating games people play, that negativity is relative. So you want to be fair and you have to be critical because you understand the fans are as well. But everything is relative, and the Bears having a double-digit losing season, there are worse things in the world than seeing a quarterback throw 3 interceptions on a Sunday against the Lions.
What's the worst quarterbacking performance you've seen covering the Bears from any of their quarterbacks?
I love that question. Because there are so many. Listen, John, you go look up Google. Craig Krenzel at one point in time had a clunker. Jonathan Quinn had a clunker. I think probably, though, the Todd Collins experience seems to stick out to me, but there was a preseason game. It might have been 2004. Chad Hutchinson, I'm not even sure that he registered. I think he might have been a 0.00 quarterback rating. Chad Hutchinson used to be a Bears starting quarterback, turned into a backup quarterback. And I think after one preseason game, they just cut him. He was that bad. So I have been here through some terrible quarterbacks. I have endured the times where, I was a Rex Grossman guy. Absolutely. I raised my hand proudly. Go Rex, sexy Rexy. I lived through the Jay Cutler era. I should have a t-shirt. There have been a lot of terrible quarterbacks. I hope that we have reached the end of that tradition. That's a Bear tradition they need to stop, squash. So hopefully that is where I will go positive. And we aren't cheerleaders and we're not fans. We are guys who are going to evaluate this. But I hope that Justin Fields succeeds so we have seen the last of the bad quarterbacking in Chicago.
And David, before we finish up today, last question. What's the best moment you had in Vegas this past weekend with 670?
Vegas was a great trip. The Mully and Haugh show went out there. Mike Mulligan, Dustin Rhodes, Mitch Rosen we were there with Circus Sports. Circus Sports is a terrific, it is a terrific place. It is a lot of fun. I think the best moment was just getting up so it's 3:15 Vegas time. We're on the air at 4. I'm down in the, Circa Casino where we have our studio set up, and we come down and the place is like, I don't know if it's 3:15 a.m. or 3:15 p.m. because the place is packed. You just can't tell them. You just don't know. That was one of the moments where you thought, okay, I'm in Vegas now. The other one was when, Mully and Mitch Rosen, they had some luck at the slot machines and they were gambling a little bit and they both won some money, and seeing the looks on their face made the trip worth it. And we just spent a lot of time together at some really cool restaurants and real cool sites. And we met some great people, Derek Stevens, the owner. And I think just overall, I'm not a big Vegas guy, John. I've not been there a ton, but I do think that this past trip, just going there with Score and the Mully and Haugh show, that was a memorable weekend.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining me. Always a pleasure. Best wishes. We Take the North End. Mully and Haugh every morning on 670.
Keep up the great work, John. You're doing a terrific job, and anytime.